I'm Chantal Cross. I'm from Crosscheck Consultancy Limited, and welcome to my webinar. This is really focused on the prevention of sexual harassment within the workplace. But as I will tell you a bit later on, parts of those duties is widening later on this year. And I just thought schools are in a unique position of pressure, really, with not just the legislative pressure, but it's a highly regulated industry. Accountability is rising, and on top of all of that, you've just had a new Ofsted framework, which is rather handy. So leaders are expected to evidence, not just stick some policies in, but actually ensure that those values are really lived around behaviour, well-being, inclusion and leadership. And with staff shortages, high workloads, and it seems like shifting sands, it's just really, really tough in schools. I've worked with schools for around 20 odd years, and the scrutiny just seems to go up and up and up. And if that wasn't enough, obviously in October 2024, the new legal duty under the Worker Protection Act came in, which is in addition to the Equality Act, which introduced a proactive duty to prevent sexual harassment, which is also changing in October to be even more challenging. And now Ofsted and independent schools are increasingly looking for evidence that staff understand professional boundaries, people feel safe to speak up, and colleagues know how to intervene. And leaders have created these systems that actually prevent problems, not just respond to them. And when schools get staff harassment, safeguarding and harassment prevention right, it directly strengthens the evidence for leadership, culture and safeguarding. So today I want to show you what actually needs to change and how schools can meet these expectations. I will also be sharing all the way through how I help organisations all the time save time with this process, how you can help to protect your employees and the communities they serve. And you'll also have the opportunity to go on a wait list for a one-stop solution to help you with this duty. So most of you are here because you're absolutely committed to giving your students the best possible education, often within small, close-knit school communities with really strong relationships. And sometimes that's an advantage, but other times it's not, because if you've got those strong relationships, I know that you've built up often a really strong safeguarding culture where it's normal to speak up, but it's one thing speaking up about a child and something completely different speaking up about a colleague. Now, I've made a guess here and about some assumptions, but I'm really open to feedback with what actually goes on in your experience. So please do put a number down in the chat with any of these points that you resonate with. And obviously none of this means that you failed. You're just doing what used to be considered enough. The law, Ofsted and independent schools inspectorate are asking slightly different questions now. Not just do you respond appropriately when things happen, but what are you actively doing to prevent it? So the gap is evidence of prevention. So, for example, can staff clearly describe professional boundaries? Do they feel confident speaking up early? In my experience, actually reporting something or challenging something is completely different from recognising it and realising something happens. And I do go into all those doubts and active bystander issues in my training that I provide to schools. I mean, would staff know how to intervene safely as well if something felt uncomfortable? And can leaders show evidence that they've assessed the risks and actually acted upon them. These are the kind of things that inspectors are increasingly wanting to explore when they talk to staff. And when these things are done well, not only does it help you actually strengthen your evidence across safeguarding leadership, culture and staff wellbeing, but culturally it's a nicer place to work, it's a safer place to work, and it's a whole school approach. So the real question for many schools isn't, do we care about this? It's, have we built the systems and confidence that demonstrate that prevention? So let's look at these one by one, look at where the gap is, because the gap is what is stopping schools achieving the outcome they really want to have. So what I do see very often is that, you know, the schools are very well prepared in terms of policies, and they, a lot of schools, because of obviously the ways that schools operate, and those constraints, it's not easy to get everyone together in one place. So they give that recorded training. But the duty is increasing in October 2026. So is this actually going to change behaviour? Was it current? There is case law about having that training really regularly. And was it actually understood, you know? So are there any checks happening after that training to see if there's any gaps in that knowledge? How is it reinforced? And what evidence have you got to show that you've taken all reasonable steps, which is what it's moving to? So the gap here is translation from, you know, the measure that you put in place to actually cultural change, what happens on the ground. There are no reports of sexual harassment, so we don't have a problem. Well, that only, this, I actually heard this from an HR manager once, and I said, no, that just means that no one's telling you what's going on. And it's incredibly dangerous assumption, because it misunderstands human behaviour, and actually the psychological safety and staff voice is absolutely key here. We don't have the time with the new ISI or Ofsted framework. I totally get that. I really do. But this really is a non-negotiable. But the good news is that it doesn't reduce expectations. It redistributes them. I do think that schools have an incredible advantage actually with this duty, because you're used to that safeguarding reporting atmosphere. And you already do have those kind of, that training that you would have had to have done every year, and those safeguarding systems. So this is more like, I see it, safeguarding for your staff, but it does need some attention. But if you get this right, it works so well in terms of reinforcing a really positive culture. So you will reap the rewards. We already take safeguarding seriously. This is obviously, like I said, where you've got an advantage, but it wasn't meant to manage adult workplace power dynamics or staff-to-staff conduct, or third-party harassment, which is also increasing in September of this year. So the gap here is, it has to have clear leadership ownership. And please do tell me in the chat if you don't agree with any of these, or there's something else that you're facing. We also deal with issues as they arrive. And again, that used to be enough. It's not anymore. About 50% of my clients come to me after something has happened. So let me now take you through what is happening as a result. I mean, a quick sense check for schools. These may be activities that you're really familiar with. So please, you know, let me know if you do see this happening. Maybe not in your school, but in others. So when schools are under pressure to interpret a new framework, the pressure is on alongside with business and as usual, and the kind of duties you have in school are incredibly difficult to balance because everything seems to be very urgent. But what I do see repeatedly are incredibly well-intentioned actions that feel productive, and they're definitely part of what needs to be done, but they don't always reduce the risk. So do please feel free to disagree with me or tell me what you see happening. So I do find that generally schools will update their policies fairly quickly. And this is part of what needs doing, but they don't necessarily change behaviour unless people understand and trust them. They rerun this generic training, which is usually 30 minutes remote training in between 2 Zoom calls. And it's like, well, we've done that. So that's the tick box done. Now, obviously, recorded training does have its place, but does it change what's happening in real situations? So a couple of things to note about training: it needs to be current, and there's case law that confirms this. Needs to be really regular, it needs to be really fit for purpose and actually cover the key points. So really it needs to be tailored for the organisation or the industry, to really be a reasonable step, because the evidence shows that sexual harassment is happening right now in schools, and it often goes unreported and challenged, and that isn't actually unique to schools. That is a cultural thing. There is very widespread underreporting of sexual harassment cases, and the cure to that is to create an environment where people feel safe to report. Very often the responsibility lands on someone who's already overloaded, either HR or the COO or the bursar, HR business partners as well, or bursars. They generally have huge responsibilities for, not only health and safety, but finance as well as HR, and that just creates overload, so that it does need to be resourced properly. But staff to staff sexual harassment is not a one person responsibility. Just like safeguarding, it's everyone's responsibility. And many schools also, and organisations, assume that because safeguarding processes exist, sexual harassment prevention could be implicitly covered, that people know how to behave because it's in the induction training and regular meetings with managers, but it isn't enough. So I don't know if you've heard of the quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So strategy is what defines what you want to achieve, but culture determines how people actually behave when no one is watching. And it's that how is what decides the success of failure or failure. And like I said here as well, that people do tend to focus on the most urgent or in crisis. And I get that, that's human nature, and sometimes it's all you can do. But as I mentioned earlier on, don't wait too long. This is incredibly important, and you don't really want to wait until you need me. Put it that way. Now, given that, so the last thing you want to be in is crisis. So but the other thing to say about the safeguarding system as well is that it's largely built for response. You do obviously have the codes of conduct and the safeguarding training annually, but it is very much also focused on the response side of things. I don't know if you feel that that's a fair summary. And with this, it is also very preventative. So I think there is some similarities there, as I understand it. So I wanted to just point you in the direction of a few little pieces of information that actually demonstrate where I'm coming from in terms of sexual harassment in schools. And Unison did this survey in March of 2024 of more than 2,000 school staff across the UK, and they found that 10% of female support staff in secondary schools said they personally experienced sexual harassment, mostly by pupils but also by colleagues. More than a quarter of secondary school staff have witnessed sexual harassment in the last 5 years, and 7% of all school staff say that they've been harassed themselves. And remember, for every one person who reports something, there are many more who feel that it's pointless to report, or they're too embarrassed, or they don't think anything will get done, or maybe they've misinterpreted it. And, you know, there are a lot of statistics on underreporting, but suffice to say, depending on which study you look at, there was one by the Gender Equality Commission, I think, who indicated that underreporting was at 75%. But in addition, the third-party harassment is coming along in October, and so your third parties are basically anyone that you work with who isn't an employee. And a lot of them are kind of thinking, there was another survey, I think I think this was the survey actually that indicated that well, just some horrific behaviour from students towards members of staff as well, and the staff witnessing I think it was 24% of staff witnessed pupils discussing sexist online content, and over 50% of those witnessing sexist online content had noticed changes in pupil behaviour linked to it. And the stats go on and on. I won't bore you with it, but there is just so much. So I think that's enough said about that. I'm going to move on now to what the Ofsted Rapid Review, excuse me, which was done in 2021. They looked at 32 different schools, 900 students, and Ofsted were asked by the government to actually carry out this rapid review of sexual abuse in schools. And on their visits, they were told that sexual harassment and online sexual abuse, such as being sent unsolicited explicit material and being pressured to send nude photos, was very prevalent, much more prevalent than adults realised. For example, nearly 90% of girls and nearly 50% of boys said being sent explicit pictures or videos of things they didn't want to see happen happened a lot, or sometimes to them. Children and young people told us that sexual harassment occurs so frequently that it has become commonplace. So 92% of girls and 74% of boys said there was sexist name calling. And the frequency of these harmful sexual behaviours mean that some children and young people consider them normal. So in the light of this, even where school and college leaders do not have specific information that indicates sexual harassment and online sexual abuse are problems for their children, they should act on the assumption that they are. That was the overarching recommendation from these studies. And then obviously you've got a wider preventative approach across the whole school environment under keeping children safe in education, and that has been strengthened. And inspection frameworks have placed greater emphasis on safeguarding culture and how schools address sexual harassment and peer-on-peer abuse, The schools have been expected to demonstrate preventative measures for a long time. But how can you do that unless your staff are aware and they know how to recognise inappropriate behaviour? Because sometimes it's subtle. My training does cover that, by the way, and that's backed up with training notes and a much wider sort of cultural and stakeholder emphasis as well, so that you've got a well-rounded approach. And, you know, looking at effective reporting processes rather than simply responding to incidents. So awareness of this 2021 review that I mentioned before was fairly high among leaders, and around 2/3 of schools reported that they had already changed their policies in response. But this really matters because normalisation creates pathways for behaviour to escalate as they find the boundaries of what is expected. So moving on, only a few more slides left. Quickly going to take you through the Worker Protection Act. So what has changed? So obviously it's a preventative duty now. And why do we need to do this? I mean, why is everyone making such a big fuss? Well, it's the right thing to do. There's so much evidence out there that it's a huge problem. You've only got to switch on the news to find the latest, you know, BBC report about female surgeons being sexually harassed in theatre. Harrods, the Met Police being institutionally racist and misogynistic following the murder of Sarah Everard. Bake Off, the list goes on and on and on. And more than 1 in 5 people worldwide, that's 23%, have experienced one or more forms of violence or harassment at work in their lives. I mean, obviously it's the law now as well from the 26th of October 2024. But it's also, as I said before, it's really good for your organisation. It can increase your productivity amongst your reports to 22%. And obviously it's to protect your staff as well. And the Worker Protection Act is getting tougher. In October of this year, people will now be able to bring claims, a standalone claim for third-party harassment, and they will you're now obligated to take all reasonable steps, not just reasonable steps. So what does Ofsted actually look for in all of this? They look for, I mean, my framework, which includes training and cultural tools to scaffold this for staff, leaders and governors, strengthens the organisation's culture, compliance and safeguarding practice in ways that directly align with Ofsted's new inspection toolkit. And this work becomes a direct lever for schools to demonstrate compliance, strengthen their culture and reduce risk. So they're also looking for an awful lot within this new framework, but ultimately they're looking for evidence that real behaviour change has happened, and what actually happens on a day-to-day basis is what the leaders are telling them. And schools that can explain how they identify risk, listen to staff and act proportionally are much more confident in inspection conversations. So this duty doesn't create inspection pressure. It reduces it because it gives you the language, the evidence, the confidence to show that your culture is intentional, not accidental. So obviously with safeguarding, Ofsted requires leaders to ensure staff know, understand and uphold their safeguarding responsibilities. And that concerns are raised in a culture where people feel comfortable and confident that appropriate action will be taken. So your training strengthens this by building staff confidence to recognise, challenge and report sexual harassment. in a proactive safeguarding culture. And it's whether adults working in the organisation are also protected from harm and know how to raise concerns and how to recognise those subtle indicators as well, and how to challenge them appropriately and safely. Inclusion and wellbeing is also a real focus, and the toolkit highlights leaders' responsibility to understand the range of barriers to wellbeing. Our approach helps schools identify and reduce risks for groups disproportionately affected by harassment, supporting a more inclusive and psychologically safe workplace and improving that psychological safety. And it does reduce underreporting, which is, as I mentioned before, is incredibly prevalent. So when adult culture is unclear or not consistent, pupils notice. Where concerns are taken seriously and handled fairly, inclusion improves. So this really does support organisations to create that respectful environment, and supports the Ofsted requirement that sexual harassment must be dealt with quickly, consistently and effectively. So our training does equip staff to intervene quickly and safely. And finally, leadership and governments. Ofsted expect leaders to show strategic oversight, reflective practice and continued improvement, and to be receptive to challenge and reflective about their own practices. So that staff voice is incredibly important as well, which we have built into this framework. So it strengthens that leadership credibility, reinforces the behavioural expectations and creates the conditions where inclusion can actually thrive. And we also meet the staff training standards Ofsted expects, which is high quality evidence informed training that improves safeguarding practice. So within the toolkit, it says that staff must be trained well and empowered to speak out and take action. Our tailored sessions really do increase confidence. I do a questionnaire at the beginning and at the end of each training session, and everybody's confidence really improves. So this training, what might be happening right now is obviously you've done the policy, you've done the training, which is delivered once, which may or may not be tailored to the organisation, but due to the nature of the delivery of education, it's really hard to get the time to train staff. And in addition, how do you capture the new starters that start directly after you've done the training? Issues arise and are reported, the organisation reacts and has to investigate, and then you're looking for someone impartial with the right expertise, and have they been trained, and then are the actions taken as a result, which then puts the organisation under pressure and are not preventative, if you see what I mean. So please correct me if I'm wrong. There may be some gaps here, and you're not alone in this. Like I said, 50% of my clients come to me after something has happened, but some gaps might be that there's no sort of testing maybe to check whether there's any gaps in the knowledge once you've done the training. Finding the time to actually train is hard. Your training might not be actually tailored for you, and perhaps you haven't quite got your head around the third-party risk, which is understandable, but it needs to be addressed. And maybe you haven't got an anonymous reporting helpline or platform where you could do this, and perhaps you're not thinking about all of the stakeholders involved in this. So how are you being challenged by your stakeholders, and have you got champions within your organisation? A lot of schools are quite big, so Are you addressing that underreporting issue as well? So how do you prevent sexual harassment? Well, you start off with a risk assessment that has to be really quite detailed and looking at power imbalances in particular, but then you need to generally obviously take action and ensure that this risk assessment doesn't just gather dust in a drawer. You need practical scenario-led training that is going to equip your staff with the tools to challenge and recognise inappropriate behaviour and to challenge it safely, as well as clear, trusted reporting channels and anonymous voice mechanisms. Leaders need to be trained as well to recognise issues as part of their daily, their normal management skills, to get to know their staff so that they know what good looks like and they know how to recognise when something's not right. Schools that are genuinely reducing risk aren't doing more work, they're just doing smarter work. They use risk assessments tailored to their context, and they're equipping their people with the skills using real world scenarios, not tick box e-learning, and they're building those reporting channels that staff actually trust, including anonymous options. So this is the framework that I have developed. And it's about identifying that risk really early and giving consideration as to who is going to feed into this and how often, who will see it and what actions will be taken, who will own the organisation-wide risk assessment, looking at that communication plan, where are expectations made explicit and to who? And it's not just to staff, but what about governors, trustees, visitors, contractors, agency workers? They all need that consideration. And how are you going to actually manage any complaints about those third parties? Who will do it and what are the options? You need that practical, tailored, scenario-based training to really upskill your staff. And what other tools do you need to actually implement this? Do you need governor training? Will you implement champions? What will their roles be? What checklists have you got? How are you capturing it in induction? What software? And trusted reporting groups as well. I would very strongly recommend that every organisation seriously considers an independent anonymous reporting system. Again, I have one I can recommend that is included with all my packages if you want them to be. How can you also ensure that staff voice is listened to as well? Are you doing those regular staff surveys, and can you prove what action you've taken with them? So why does this need urgent attention, I hear you ask? Well, the duty is incredibly wide. Someone could overhear or see inappropriate behaviour, even if it's not directed at them. And this could give rise to a claim. And also, people don't have to complain for there to be risk. They can raise challenges at tribunal without actually having complained in the first place. Similarly, someone could even join in with the banter and then subsequently submit a claim. There is specific case law with that. It's a very proactive responsibility as well, and it must be actively implemented. The legal and financial risks are absolutely huge. A colleague of mine, a very good friend of mine, is assisting a workplace with a tribunal claim, and I think they're up to £20,000 now, and they've not even got to court yet. The thing is, with this particular duty, it's considered to be discrimination, and for which the sanctions, the financial sanctions, are uncapped, and very often they will be scheduled at tribunal for around 3 days or more. So even before you've got there, you're looking at quite a substantial amount of money in time and stress and management time in getting all the bundles together, responding, going to preliminary hearings, all sorts. And in addition, the Equality and Human Rights Commission could get involved and upscale that to 20 with an additional 25%. So, I mean, tribunals will take into account your size and your resources when considering what reasonable steps would be for your organisation. They won't consider this when they're delivering the actual sanction. And records are showing that more typical awards in sexual harassment cases can vary, but have been seen around £350,000 in notable recent cases. In addition, phone calls to ACAS have gone up by 39%, and I think in the last year, tribunal cases went up by about 50% to do with sexual harassment. So why listen to me? So I've got around 20 years plus VAT experience. Most of them have been spent in schools, a university, multi-academy trusts, and I specialise in this kind of work. This is what I do every day, all day, every day. And I have specially adapted the training for multiple different industries, from 6 people online to 90 people in person. So this is what I live and breathe. And I have done all the heavy lifting for you. So year on year, ET claims are rising, and I just want to help you prevent that and keep people happy at work. So just want to go back in and talk a little bit about what the all reasonable steps mean. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission, they've produced a framework which is really worth looking at, because it does give the overall approach, but it is at 82 pages long, but it's actually not too bad a read. It's fairly plain language, and it gives lots of scenarios. So the all reasonable steps, obviously we don't know exactly, because it needs to be tested in, and the tribunals will start to test that, but we do know that you need to have a policy, you need to have a really detailed risk assessment that is frequently reviewed, really engage with your staff, find out where those power imbalances are through one-to-ones, and ensure that they know how to report that. Consider that those centralised anonymous reporting systems, and train everyone, assess that effectiveness and address those gaps. Ensure that your staff, your employees know how to respond to reports or complaints, and that they know how to act swiftly and confidently. I do offer training for managers as well. And with third parties, I think this is quite big for schools. So need to be thinking around the risk. What are the risks with third parties, and how are you going to communicate those standards, and what action will be taken in the event of concerns? And finally, how are you going to monitor and review all of this and implement this? So consider really regular training sessions, so that include active bystander and recognising microaggressions, and establish that communication and that safety, that psychological safety to report. So the difference between reasonable steps and all reasonable steps obviously is one word, but Reasonable steps is doing what a prudent employer of their size and resources and risk profile would do to identify and minimise the likelihood of harm. In contrast, all reasonable steps is a much higher threshold, and it requires an employer to demonstrate that they have taken every step that would be reasonable to take in the circumstances, not merely some or most. The difference is subtle, but really, really important. So it's all about adequacy and proportionality. So whilst the all reasonable steps demands thoroughness and completeness, any gap that could reasonably have been filled, for example, training not refreshed, risks not assessed, gaps in third-party controls, could defeat the employer's defence or show non-compliance with the duty. So there are a few cases that bring to mind. Meanstar versus 5 Ways Express Transport. That is about a lady who saw colleagues downloading pornographic material within the office that she shared. And they didn't show it to her. She didn't complain about it, but it was found to meet the legal definition of harassment. Hunter v. Liddell. This was, there was complaints made about sexual harassment by the manager, and she asked, and by a colleague as well, and the lady complained and asked to be moved to another store, and the response was that she should just enjoy the attention. And there's another case here called Beanie versus Highways England, which I believe demonstrates that an individual themselves can actually be named in the tribunal, which we are finding more and more often. So the risk isn't just to the organisation, but to individual people as well. So just a few bits of feedback. When I do deliver a training, I try to make a bit of a dry subject, really, really engaging, but very, very clear as well. And I try to, well, I include lots of real life scenarios, case law, and lots of different ways of trying to get the message across. And I also do a quiz afterwards. So I just want to quickly talk you through. So I've called it the staff safeguarding framework. So I had called it the anti-harassment staff safeguarding, but the acronym was troublesome. So let's just say I had to rethink that. So just to go through what I offer. So I offer a complete Ofsted aligned sexual harassment prevention system for schools, and that includes not just policies, but a risk assessment that guides you through a list of actions you can take to actively prevent, a flowchart, summary guidance for managers, training for managers, training for peer anti-harassment champions, tailored training for all staff, refresher training, pre-event social event communication, other communication for staff, posters, post-training quiz that checks knowledge, and also ticks the box from the Equality and Human Rights Commission that suggests that you listen to your employee suggestions, for which there is also case law. And there's just so much that I offer. I literally thought about everything. I've got an agreement for agency workers as well to sign, briefings for governors and trustees, and for induction for staff that newly join after the training, and so much more. And if it's not in there and you think, well, we could really do with that, I'm more than happy to help with that. There's also like anonymous HR survey questions. I've got a partner that delivers an anonymous reporting system. And I am also going to be introducing a platform where you have a one-stop shop for all of this, including your refresher training. So if that's something you're interested in, please let me know. And as a result of this, and you giving me your time, I would like to offer you all a free Where You're At review. And this includes a 20-minute feedback session from me. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me today. And I really very much look forward to hearing from you. So just to let you know as well, this Where You're At review, it's not an audit, it's not an inspection, it's absolutely not about catching anyone out. It's just about let's find where the gaps are, and then you can choose what to do from there. Okay, thanks very much.